In the suffocating silence of a Manhattan lawyer's office, Clara signed the divorce papers without a tear, a scream, or a plea. To her ex-husband, Wall Street's golden boy, Bruno Brown, she was nothing more than a pretty ornament, fading into obscurity with a settlement check. But the cold smile she gave him suggested otherwise. It took 5 years for Bruno to understand the true weight of that moment. Clara didn't just survive the separation. She was reborn, returning with $1 billion empire to purchase the very company that had cast her aside. This wasn't a breakup, it was a declaration of war. The conference room on the 45th floor of the Brown Vanderbilt Tower smelled of old money and lemon polish. It was a sterile, cold environment, fitting for the execution about to take place. Outside, the gray New York skyline loomed, weeping a steady drizzle against the floor-to-ceiling glass. Clara sat on one side of the mahogany table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress, one she had bought off the rack at Macy's 3 years ago, before she became Mrs. Brown. Across from her sat Bruno Brown, the man who had once promised her the world, now scrolling through his BlackBerry, looking bored. Next to him sat the real power in the room, his mother, Beatrice Brown. Beatrice was a woman carved from granite and draped in Chanel. She didn't look at Clara, she looked through her, as if Clara were a smudge on a window pane that the cleaning crew had missed. The terms are standard. Clara, the family lawyer, a weasel of a man named Mr. Henderson, droned on. He slid a heavy document across the table. It landed with a dull thud, a lump sum of $200,000. You keep the jewelry Bruno gave you, excluding the family heirlooms, naturally, and of course, the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement. That was the shackle. It stipulated that Clara could never speak of the Brown family business, their private dealings, or the incident in the Hamptons last summer. If she did, she would be sued into oblivion. Just sign it, Clara, Bruno sighed, finally looking up. His blue eyes, once the anchor of her life, were now impatient. I have a dinner at the Pierre at 7. Let's get this over with. You want it out? You're out. Beatrice took a sip of her sparkling water. Make sure she understands the clause about the name, Henderson. She is to revert to her maiden name immediately. We can't have her running around Manhattan pretending to still be one of us. Clara remained silent. For 3 years, she had been the perfect wife, the silent support, the one who smoothed over Bruno's drunken outbursts, who organized the charity galas, who hid her own brilliance to make him feel like the smartest man in the room. She had a master's degree in algorithmic trading from MIT, a fact the Browns conveniently forgot because it didn't fit the narrative of the lucky girl from the Midwest who married a prince. She reached for the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and expensive. Is there anything you wish to say, Clara? Henderson asked, his tone mocking. He expected begging. He expected a fight for more alimony. Clara uncapped the pen. The scratch of the nib on the paper was the only sound in the room. Clara. J. Evans. She pushed the papers back. Then, she stood up. No, Clara said softly. Her voice was steady, lacking the tremble Beatrice had undoubtedly hoped for. I think everything has been said. She looked at Bruno. He was already texting again. He didn't see the look in her eyes. A look not of defeat, but of calculation. She looked at Beatrice. Goodbye, Beatrice, Clara said. Don't let the door hit you, Beatrice muttered, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. Henderson, call the car. I need to be at the Met Gala committee meeting. Clara walked to the elevator. She didn't look back. She didn't take the private elevator. She took the service lift. As the doors closed, sealing off the world of the 1%, she let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 3 years. She walked out of the building and into the rain. She had no umbrella. She had $200,000 to her name pennies in this city and a reputation that was about to be shredded by the Brown PR machine. She hailed a cab. Where to, lady? The driver asked. JFK, Clara said. International Terminal. She wasn't going home to Ohio. She wasn't staying in New York to be pitiable. She was going to Zurich. She had a meeting with an old friend from MIT, a man named Lucas Weber, who had been begging her to look at a piece of code he'd written for the last 6 months. Bruno thought he had taken her life away. He didn't realize he had just given her back her freedom, and he had absolutely no idea that before she signed those papers, she had memorized the contents of the unencrypted hard drive he left on his desk every night. She knew where the bodies were buried, but she wasn't going to call the police. That was too easy. She was going to buy the graveyard. 2 years later, the world moves fast, but money moves faster. In the 2 years since Clara Evans vanished from New York society, the Brown Group had grown more aggressive. Bruno Brown, now CEO, after his father's stroke, had pivoted the company toward high-risk tech acquisitions. He was the darling of CNBC, the maverick of Manhattan, but while Bruno was splashing cash on flashy apps and overvalued social media platforms, something was happening in the shadows of the global market. A new player had emerged, a private equity firm called Estrella Holdings. Nobody knew who ran Estrella. The firm was registered in Singapore, with subsidiaries in Zurich and London. They were a ghost. They didn't give interviews. They didn't attend Davos, but they were lethal. They had quietly acquired a controlling stake in Lithium X, a failing battery manufacturer in Nevada. 6 months later, Lithium X patented a new solid-state battery that revolutionized the electric vehicle market. The stock soared 400%. Estrella made billions. Then, they moved into biotech. They bought Celgen, a small lab in Boston teetering on bankruptcy. 3 months later, the FDA fast-tracked a breakthrough treatment for early-onset Alzheimer's. Another billion. In a glass-walled office, overlooking the shivering blue expanse of Lake Zurich, Clara Evans stood watching the snow fall. She looked different. The mousy brown hair was now a sharp, platinum blonde bob. The off-the-rack Macy's dresses were gone, replaced by bespoke suits from Savile Row, sleek, sharp, and intimidating. She wore glasses now, thick black frames that hid the softness of her eyes. "We have a problem, Clara," a voice said behind her. It was Lucas. He was dressed in a hoodie and jeans, looking every bit the hacker genius he was. He was the only person in the world who called her Clara. To the rest of her employees, she was Miss K. "What kind of problem?" Clara asked, turning around. She didn't panic. She hadn't panicked since the day she left New York. "It's Bruno," Lucas said, pulling up a schematic on the massive touchscreen table in the center of the room. "The Brown Group is trying to acquire Omnicore." Clara's eyes narrowed. Omnicore was a cloud computing infrastructure firm. It was boring, unsexy, and absolutely critical to the global banking system. It was the backbone of half of Wall Street's transaction processing. "He doesn't know what he's buying," Clara murmured, walking to the table. "Bruno thinks it's just a server farm. He wants the real estate assets." "Exactly," Lucas tapped the screen. "But if he buys Omnicore, he inadvertently gets access to the back-end data of his competitors. It's a monopoly waiting to happen. The SEC is asleep at the wheel, but if Brown gets this, he becomes too big to fail." "What's his bid?" $4.2 billion. Leveraged buyout. "He's overextending himself, Clara. He's using the Brown family trust as collateral." Clara froze. A slow smile spread across her face. It was the same smile she had worn in the lawyer's office. "He put the trust up?" she asked softly. "Yeah. Beatrice must be losing her grip if she let him do that. Or maybe he didn't tell her." "He didn't tell her," Clara said with certainty. "Bruno is arrogant. He thinks he can flip Omnicore, strip the assets, and pay back the loan before Mommy finds out." Clara tapped the table. "What's our liquidity?" Lucas grimaced. "We're tied up in the Singapore expansion. We have maybe 5 billion liquid. We can't outbid him." "We don't need to outbid him," Clara said, her mind racing through the algorithms she used to dream about at MIT. "We need to bleed him." She walked back to the window. The reflection showed a woman who had rebuilt herself from ash. "Lucas, get me a meeting with the board of Omnicore. Tell them Estrella is interested in a strategic partnership to fend off a hostile takeover. We're going to act as a white knight. They won't meet with a ghost, Clara. You have to show your face. You have to go to the precipice." Clara touched the cold glass. If I show my face, the element of surprise is gone. Bruno will know I'm coming. Then send a proxy, Lucas suggested. Send Arthur. Arthur Pendleton, the disgraced Wall Street banker she had hired 6 months ago. He was a shark who had been banned from trading for 5 years due to aggressive tactics. His ban had just lifted. He hated the Browns almost as much as she did. No, Clara said, turning back. Arthur is too volatile. I need to do this. She walked over to her desk and picked up a tablet. She opened a secure file labeled Project Nemesis. We aren't going to buy Omnicore, Lucas. We are going to let Bruno buy it. Lucas looked confused. What? You just said. We let him buy it, Clara interrupted, her voice hard. But before he closes the deal, we are going to short the hell out of Brown Group stock. And then, she swiped the screen, bringing up a dossier on a man named Sebastian Vane, and then, we are going to leak the environmental report on Omnicore's server farms in Iceland, the one they buried in 2018. The one that proves their cooling systems are leaking toxic coolant into the groundwater. Lucas's eyes went wide. That tanks the stock. Omnicore becomes toxic, and Bruno will be holding the bag, Clara finished. He'll have a $4 billion debt on an asset that is suddenly worthless. The Brown Trust will be insolvent. That's brutal, Clara. That's business, Lucas. She checked the time. Book the jet. We're going to New York. Not to meet Omnicore. I have an invitation to the masquerade ball at the Guggenheim. It's time I checked in on my ex-husband. You're going to a party? I'm going to a funeral, Clara corrected. The Guggenheim Museum was transformed into a gilded cage for the night. The theme was Venetian Decadence, a fitting title for a room full of people who had more money than some small countries. Clara stepped out of a sleek, black limousine. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her like liquid shadow, the back plunging dangerously low. Her face was hidden behind a mask of intricate silver filigree, leaving only her eyes, cool, calculating, and unrecognizable, visible. She wasn't Clara Evans tonight. She was the investor. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of gossip. Clara moved through the crowd with a predatory grace she hadn't possessed 3 years ago. She spotted them almost immediately. Bruno stood near the champagne fountain, laughing too loudly. On his arm was Sienna, a 23-year-old model who looked bored out of her mind. Beatrice was nearby, holding court with a senator, looking like a vulture in velvet. Clara felt a flicker of old fear, a phantom pain in her chest, but she crushed it. Fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. She felt a presence beside her. You look like you're plotting a murder, a deep voice drawled. Clara didn't flinch. She turned to see a man in a simple black domino mask. He was tall, with the kind of stillness that suggested danger. Sebastian Vane, the rival billionaire Bruno, had been trying to bury for years. Not a murder, Mr. Vane, Clara said, her voice smooth and lower than usual. Just a correction. Sebastian tilted his head. Do I know you? You will, Clara replied. I hear you're looking to offload your shipping logistics division, Vane Maritime. Sebastian stiffened. That's not public knowledge. It is to me. I'm willing to buy it. Tonight. Cash. Sebastian laughed, a harsh, surprised sound. Who are you? Call me Estrella, she said. I'll give you $1.2 billion for the division, but you have to do something for me. And what is that? Go over to Bruno Brown. Tell him you heard a rumor that Omnicore is about to be acquired by a Chinese conglomerate. Tell him if he doesn't close the deal by tomorrow morning, he loses it forever. Sebastian's eyes narrowed behind the mask. He looked at Bruno, then back at the mystery woman. He realized instantly that he was a pawn in a much larger game, but $1.2 billion for a failing division was a lifeline he desperately needed. You play dirty, Sebastian noted with a grin. I learned from the best, Clara whispered, her eyes drifting to Beatrice. She watched as Sebastian walked over to Bruno. She saw the color drain from Bruno's face. Panic, greed, the two most powerful motivators in his shallow soul, Bruno immediately pulled out his phone, stepping away from Sienna. Clara moved to intercept him. She brushed past him, her silk dress whispering against his tuxedo. "Careful, Bruno," she murmured as she passed, close enough for him to smell her perfume, a custom scent of bergamot and wood smoke, nothing like the vanilla she used to wear. Bruno spun around, grabbing her wrist. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" Clara looked down at his hand until he released her. The contact made her skin crawl, but she held his gaze. "Someone who knows that Omnicore is a house of cards?" She lied smoothly, planting the reverse psychology. "Don't buy it, Bruno. It's a trap," Bruno sneered, his arrogance flaring up. "A trap? Or are you just trying to scare me off so your client can swoop in? Vane just told me the Chinese are circling." "Believe what you want," Clara said, walking away. "But don't say you weren't warned." She disappeared into the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew Bruno. If you told him not to do something, he would do it twice, just to prove he was the smartest man in the room. By warning him, she had sealed his fate. She left the gala before midnight, like a Cinderella who had planted a bomb instead of losing a glass slipper. The next morning, the headache behind Bruno's eyes was blinding, but the adrenaline was stronger. He paced his corner office, barking orders into his headset. "I don't care what the due diligence says, Henderson. Waive it. If we don't sign by noon, we lose the asset to the overseas market. Get the papers ready. I'm authorizing the transfer from the family trust." Across the city, in a rented penthouse suite that served as Estrella's temporary HQ, Clara sat in front of a bank of monitors. Lucas was typing furiously. "He's moving the money," Lucas said, his voice tight. 4.2 billion. It's leaving the Brown Trust accounts. It's hitting the escrow. "Wait for it," Clara said, sipping her black coffee. "He's signing," Lucas said. The digital signature just authenticated on the Omnicore server. "Now," Clara said. Lucas hit enter. It wasn't a bomb. It was a press release. Breaking news. Whistleblower leaks toxic report on Omnicore data centers. Within seconds, the news tickers on the bottom of Clara's screens lit up red. The report, detailed and damning, revealed that Omnicore's primary data centers in Iceland had been leaking coolant into a protected glacial reserve for 5 years. The fines alone would be in the billions. The cleanup costs would be astronomical. But the real killer was the regulatory freeze. The EU was immediately suspending Omnicore's license to operate. "Stock is halting," Lucas whispered. "Omnicore is down 60% in pre-market trading." Clara watched the numbers tumble. It was a bloodbath. "Bruno just bought a burning building," Clara said softly, and he used his mother's checkbook to do it. Back at Brown Tower, the scene was chaotic. Phones were ringing off the hook. Analysts were screaming. Bruno stood frozen, staring at the CNBC screen where the headline, "Brown Group Acquires Toxic Asset," was flashing in bold letters. The door to his office slammed open. Beatrice Brown didn't walk in. She stormed in. "What have you done?" she hissed, her voice low and terrifying. It was a sure thing," Bruno stammered, pale as a sheet. "Vane told me. The Chinese." "You listened to Sebastian Vane?" Beatrice threw a tablet onto his desk. "The EPA just announced a probe. The stock is worthless, Bruno. You've leveraged the trust. We are exposed." "I can fix it," Bruno said, his hands shaking. "I can sell off the subsidiaries. I can." "You can do nothing," Beatrice screamed. "Get out of my chair. Mother, please. Get out." As Bruno slumped onto the leather sofa, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I told you it was a trap. A." Bruno stared at the screen. The woman from the masquerade. Estrella. "Who is she?" he whispered to himself. At the penthouse, Clara stood up and stretched. "Phase 1 is complete," she said. "He's wounded. Now we go for the kill." "What's phase 2?" Lucas asked, looking at her with a mix of awe and fear. Clara turned to the whiteboard, where she had mapped out the Brown Empire. She picked up a red marker and circled a specific subsidiary. Brown Media, the crown jewel, the propaganda machine that had kept the family's image pristine for decades. "Now," Clara said, We take his voice, and we need help. Get me a meeting with the one person Beatrice Brown fears more than bankruptcy. Who? Her ex-husband's mistress, Clara said. Julianne Moore, the woman who knows where the real money is hidden. Lucas paused. She lives in exile in Paris. She hasn't spoken to anyone in 20 years. She'll speak to me, Clara said, picking up her coat, because I'm going to offer her the one thing the Browns took from her. Money? No, Clara smiled. Revenge. Paris, in November, was a city of gray stone and weeping skies. Clara sat in the corner of a small, dimly lit bistro in Le Marais, nursing a glass of Bordeaux. She wasn't looking at the menu. She was watching the door. At exactly 2 p.m., the bell above the entrance chimed. A woman walked in. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, but she carried herself with a rigid, unbreakable elegance. She wore a trench coat belted tightly at the waist and oversized sunglasses, even indoors. This was Julianne Moore, not the actress, but the woman who had once been the secret power behind the Brown throne, before Beatrice had surgically removed her from the picture 2 decades ago. Julianne scanned the room, spotted Clara, and approached. She didn't sit immediately. She studied Clara with sharp, assessing eyes. "You're younger than I expected," Julianne said, her voice raspy from years of Gauloises. "And prettier. Beatrice hates pretty women." "Sit down, Julianne," Clara said, gesturing to the chair. "I ordered your usual. Espresso. Black. No sugar." Julianne sat, removing her sunglasses to reveal tired but fierce green eyes. "You did your homework. Estrella, is it? The ghost of Wall Street." "Clara," she corrected. "My name is Clara Evans. I was Bruno's wife." Julianne let out a dry, humorless laugh. "The one they chewed up and spat out 3 years ago? I read about the divorce. A quiet affair, very un-Brown." "I was quiet then," Clara said, leaning forward. "I'm not quiet anymore." She slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a live feed of the Brown Group's stock ticker. It was bleeding red, down 45% since the Omnicore disaster. "I did that," Clara said softly. Julianne looked at the screen, a flicker of hunger in her eyes. "You crippled the boy. Bruno was always an idiot. But Beatrice, she's the Hydra. You cut off one head, 2 more, grow back. She'll liquidate the assets, hide the cash in the Caymans, and restart under a new name. You haven't won yet." "I know," Clara replied. "That's why I'm here. I know about the shadow ledger." The air in the bistro seemed to drop 10 degrees. Julianne went still. "That's a myth," Julianne whispered. "A ghost story." "It's real," Clara pressed. "Beatrice didn't build the empire on savvy investments. She built it on money laundering for the cartels in the 90s. You were the accountant, Julianne. You set up the shell companies. You have the codes." Julianne looked away, staring out at the rain-slicked cobblestones. "If I give you those codes, Beatrice goes to prison. But so do I." "No," Clara said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "This is full immunity. My lawyers cut a deal with the SEC. You turn state's evidence, you walk free. And this," she slid a second envelope, "is a deed to a villa in Tuscany, under a trust nobody can touch. You get your life back, Julianne. You get to watch her burn from a terrace in Italy." Julianne's hand trembled as she touched the envelope. For 20 years, she had lived in fear, silenced by Beatrice's threats. "Why?" Julianne asked. "Why go this far? You have money. You have power. Why not just walk away?" Clara's expression hardened into something cold and terrifying. "Because they took my dignity. They made me feel small. And then," Clara's voice cracked, just for a second, "then I found out Bruno had been sterilizing me without my knowledge. He was putting medication in my morning smoothies because Beatrice didn't want peasant blood polluting the line." Julianne gasped. The cruelty was shocking even to her. "I can never have children, Julianne," Clara whispered. "So, I'm going to birth a monster instead. I'm going to birth their destruction." Julianne picked up the pen from the table. She wrote a series of numbers and a password on a napkin. 1908888. Project Janus. The ledger is on a server in the basement of the Brown family estate in the Hamptons, Julianne said. It's not digital. It's hard-lined. It's never been connected to the internet. That's why no hacker has ever found it. The Hamptons, Clara mused. That's convenient. Why? Clara smiled. A dark, dangerous smile. Because Bruno is hosting a crisis management gala there this weekend. He thinks he can charm the investors back. He's inviting the wolves to dinner, Julianne noted. No, Clara stood up, pocketing the napkin. He's inviting the executioner. The Brown family's silver lining gala was a desperate attempt to put a bandage on a gunshot wound. The air at the Hamptons estate, usually filled with the scent of sea salt and refined privilege, now smelled of sweat and expensive gin. The mood was funeral, though the decor was festive. White orchids lined the grand foyer, their petals already beginning to brown at the edges, a subtle metaphor for the family's decaying fortune. Bruno Brown stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the crashing Atlantic waves. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His tuxedo, once a custom-fitted armor that made him feel invincible, now seemed a size too large. His hands trembled as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Bruno, stop fidgeting," Beatrice hissed, appearing at his side. She was draped in diamonds, her spine as rigid as a steel beam, but even her heavy makeup couldn't hide the shadows under her eyes. "The investors are watching. If they smell fear, they'll tear us apart before the appetizers are served." "They're already tearing us apart, Mother," Bruno whispered. "The stock is in free fall. The creditors are calling. Even Sebastian Vane won't return my calls." "Because Sebastian Vane is a coward," Beatrice snapped. "We have lived through market crashes before. We will survive this. We just need to convince them that the Omnicore scandal is a temporary setback, not a fatal blow. Now, go, smile, lie, do what Browns do best." As Bruno stepped into the ballroom to play his part, the heavy wrought iron gates at the end of the long driveway swung open. It wasn't the arrival of another socialite or a sympathetic banker. A convoy of 4 matte black SUVs rolled silently up the gravel path, their headlights cutting through the coastal fog like the eyes of predators. They didn't park in the designated valet area. They pulled right up to the front steps, blocking the entrance. The music inside the ballroom, a string quartet playing a somber Vivaldi, faltered and stopped. Guests began to migrate toward the windows, their curiosity piqued. The door to the lead SUV opened. Clara Evans stepped out, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. She was no longer the soft-spoken woman who had lived in the shadows of this house. She wore a bespoke white power suit that glowed under the estate's floodlights. Her hair was pulled back into a sharp, lethal ponytail, and her eyes, once clouded with the confusion of a gaslit wife, were now as clear and cold as glacial ice. Behind her stepped Lucas, and a team of men in dark suits carrying encrypted laptops and legal briefcases. Clara didn't wait to be invited. She walked up the marble steps, her heels sounding like the ticking of a countdown clock. Bruno met her at the door, his face a mask of confusion that quickly turned to indignation. "Clara, what is this? This is a private event. You have no business being here. Security!" He looked toward the 2 guards at the door, but they didn't move. They stood at attention, their eyes fixed straight ahead. "They aren't going to help you, Bruno," Clara said, her voice projecting with a calm authority that silenced the room. "I bought the firm that provides your estate security 4 hours ago. Technically, they work for me now. And as for my business being here, I think you'll find I'm the only person in this room who has any business here." Beatrice pushed through the crowd, her face contorted with rage. "You little parasite, you think a new haircut and a stolen car make you our equal? I gave you $200,000 to disappear. If you've spent it all on this pathetic masquerade, that's your problem. Get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Clara smiled, and for the first time, Beatrice looked genuinely afraid. It wasn't a smile of anger. It was a smile of ownership. "That's the thing, Beatrice," Clara said, stepping into the foyer and walking past them as if they were furniture. "It's not your property. Not anymore. She turned to face the crowd of investors, many of whom were the most powerful people on Wall Street. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clara announced, "my name is Clara Evans, CEO of Estrella Holdings. Many of you have been wondering who has been shorting Brown Group stock for the last month. You've been wondering who leaked the Omnicore environmental reports. You've been wondering who bought up the distressed debt of the Brown Family Trust when the bank started calling in their markers this morning." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The ghost of Wall Street wasn't a foreign conglomerate. It was the woman they had all ignored at cocktail parties for years. "I have spent the last 3 years building a billion-dollar empire while you were all busy laughing at my divorce settlement," Clara continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "As of 6 p.m. tonight, Estrella Holdings has acquired a 51% controlling interest in the Brown Group. I have also purchased the underlying mortgage on this estate and the Brown Tower in Manhattan." Bruno's glass of champagne slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was like a starting gun. "You're lying," Bruno stammered. "The trust is protected. Your father's signature is on the papers you signed to leverage the trust for the Omnicore deal." "Bruno," Clara interrupted. "You were so eager to prove you were a maverick that you didn't read the fine print. You gave the banks the right to sell that debt in the event of a 30% drop in stock value. I was the only buyer." She walked over to the grand piano, where Lucas was already setting up a laptop. He plugged it into the house's integrated media system. "Now," Clara said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "let's talk about why the Brown Group is actually worth $0. "Don't you dare," Beatrice hissed, stepping toward her. "I will kill you, Clara. I will bury you so deep." "You already tried to bury me, Beatrice. You forgot I was a seed." Clara nodded to Lucas. The massive 100-inch screens in the ballroom, which had been displaying a slideshow of Brown legacy photos, suddenly flickered. A document appeared on the screen. It was a ledger, handwritten and meticulously detailed. "This is the shadow ledger," Clara said. "It's a record of 30 years of money laundering. It shows how the Brown Group helped move dark currency through offshore accounts to fund their early acquisitions. It includes the dates, the amounts, and most importantly, the signatures of the people who authorized it." The screen scrolled down. There, in bold, unmistakable ink, was Beatrice Brown's signature next to a transaction for $20 million from a known South American cartel front. The room went deathly silent. This wasn't just a financial takeover anymore. This was a criminal execution. "And for you, Bruno," Clara said, turning to her ex-husband, who looked like he was about to vomit, "I have something more personal." The image on the screen changed. It was a medical laboratory report from a private clinic in Switzerland. "This is a record of the special vitamins you had delivered to our home every month for 3 years, Clara said, her voice trembling with the only hint of emotion she had shown all night. "The ones you insisted I take every morning. It wasn't folic acid, Bruno. It was a long-term hormonal suppressant designed to ensure I would never conceive. You and your mother decided I wasn't genetically fit to carry a Brown heir, so you sterilized me without my consent." The crowd, even the most jaded of the bankers, recoiled. A murmur of disgust filled the room. Bruno looked around, his eyes wide and wild, searching for a face that didn't look at him with loathing. He found none. I didn't know it was permanent," Bruno whispered, his voice cracking. "Mother said it was for the best. She said we needed to focus on the business first." "The business is gone, Bruno," Clara said, "and so is your mother's protection." Outside, the distant wail of sirens began to cut through the sound of the waves. The red and blue lights started to dance against the white orchids in the foyer. "I've spent the last 48 hours with the SEC and the FBI," Clara said. "I've given them everything. The ledger, the medical records, the tax fraud. They're here for the books, Beatrice. And they're here for you." Beatrice Brown, the woman who had ruled New York society with an iron fist and a pearl necklace, suddenly collapsed into a nearby chair. All the air seemed to leave her body. She looked at Clara, not with rage, but with a terrifying, hollow realization. She had been beaten by the one person she thought was beneath her notice. The front doors burst open. Federal agents in windbreakers swarmed the foyer. Beatrice Brown? Bruno Brown? A lead agent called out. You are under arrest for racketeering, securities fraud, and conspiracy. As the agents moved in to handcuff the once mighty Browns, the guests began to scramble for the exits, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive wreckage of the family name. In the middle of the chaos, Clara stood perfectly still. Bruno was being led past her, his head bowed. He stopped for a second, looking at her with a mix of terror and a pathetic, lingering hope. Clara, he whispered, please, talk to them, tell them I didn't know. You loved me once. Clara reached out and straightened his crooked tuxedo tie, a gesture she had done 1,000 times before. But this time, she didn't tuck it in with a kiss. She tightened it slightly, just enough to make him gasp. I loved a man who didn't exist, Bruno, she said softly. The man who stands here now is just a ghost, and ghosts don't get to ask for favors. She turned away as the agents pulled him toward the door. Lucas walked up to her, holding a tablet. The market opens in 12 hours, Clara. Every major news outlet is carrying the story. Brown Group is dead. Estrella is the talk of the world. Clara looked around the empty, ruined ballroom. The orchids were trampled. The champagne was spilled. The empire had fallen. Good, Clara said, taking a deep breath of the cold, salty air. Now we start the real work. She walked out of the house, down the steps, and into her SUV. She didn't look back at the flashing lights or the crumbling mansion. She looked forward, into the dark, toward the city she was about to build in her own image. The divorce was finally over. The empire had just begun. 6 months after the fall, the morning sun over Manhattan didn't just rise. It hit the glass of the new Estrella Tower like a spotlight, announcing a new era. High above the noise of the taxi horns and the frantic energy of Wall Street, Clara Evans stood in her office on the 60th floor. The office was a stark contrast to the Brown era, where Bruno had favored heavy mahogany, dark velvet, and the stuffy air of a gentleman's club. Clara's space was a temple of light. The walls were a soft, matte white, adorned with modern art that celebrated movement and chaos. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the city she had effectively conquered. She wasn't wearing the navy blue Macy's dress anymore. Today, she wore a suit of charcoal silk, tailored so precisely it felt like armor. On her desk sat a single, framed photograph, not of a family, but of the MIT campus, where her journey had truly begun. A soft chime signaled the arrival of Lucas. He walked in with 2 cups of black coffee and a thick file. He looked tired, but exhilarated. The final liquidation of the Brown assets was completed at midnight, Lucas said, handing her a cup. The Brown Group is officially a footnote in history. The Department of Justice has finished their asset seizure, and the remaining subsidiaries have been fully integrated into Estrella. Clara took a sip of the coffee, its bitterness grounding her. And the diamond? It's back at the auction house, Lucas replied. The Brown diamond. It's lot 405. The bidding starts at 2 p.m. Clara nodded. Make sure our proxy is ready. I want that stone, Lucas. Not to wear it, but to break it. The auction room was a theater of the elite. The air was thick with the scent of old perfume and the quiet rustle of high-end catalogs. When lot 405 was announced, a hush fell over the crowd. The 40-carat yellow diamond sat in a velvet-lined case, glowing under the gallery lights like a captured star. The Brown diamond, the auctioneer announced, a stone with a century of history. We'll open the bidding at $4 million. The bidding was fast and aggressive. These were people who thrived on the trophies of fallen giants. 6 million, a Russian oligarch signaled. 7 million, a tech mogul countered. From the back of the room, a woman in a simple white trench coat stood up. She didn't raise a paddle. She simply spoke. $10 million, Clara said. The room froze. Necks craned to see the woman who had just doubled the bid in a single breath. The auctioneer, a man who had seen everything, actually stuttered. 10 million. Going once, twice. The hammer fell. Sold. Clara didn't wait for the congratulations or the whispers. She walked to the front, signed the paperwork with the same steady hand that had once signed her divorce papers, and watched as the diamond was placed in a secure carrier. "Lucas," she whispered as they exited into the cool afternoon air, "take this to the workshop. I want it cut into 100 smaller stones. Set them into simple, silver pendants. We're going to give them to the graduates of the Phoenix Foundation's vocational program next month. You're turning a 40-carat diamond into 100 necklaces for survivors of domestic abuse?" Lucas asked, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I'm turning a symbol of vanity into a symbol of resilience," Clara replied. "The Browns used that diamond to show how much they were worth. Now, it will show those women how much they are worth." The second stop of the day was less glamorous. The federal penitentiary upstate was a gray, brutalist slab of concrete that seemed to suck the color out of the sky. Clara hated the way the heavy iron gates groaned when they opened. She hated the sterile smell of the visitors' center, but she had a debt of closure to pay. She sat behind the plexiglass, waiting. When Bruno was let in, she almost didn't recognize him. The golden boy was gone. His hair was a matted, dull gray, and he had lost the arrogant posture that had once defined him. He sat down, his orange jumpsuit looking garish against his pale skin. "You came," Bruno whispered into the telephone receiver. "I'm closing the books, Bruno," Clara said. "This is the last time we will ever speak." Bruno looked at her, his eyes darting around, as if searching for a way out of the conversation. "Mother is in the infirmary. She had another stroke. They say she won't ever walk again. She keeps calling for you, Clara. She thinks it's 20 years ago. She thinks you're the help." "Beatrice always struggled with the present," Clara said coolly. "Why are you doing this?" Bruno suddenly flared up, his voice cracking with a desperate, pathetic anger. "You have the money. You have the power. You've humiliated us on every news channel in the world. Isn't that enough? Why come here to gloat?" "I didn't come to gloat, Bruno. I came to tell you that I forgive you." Bruno blinked, stunned. You forgive me?" "Not because you deserve it," Clara said, leaning closer to the glass, "but because I'm done carrying the weight of what you did to me. The anger, the betrayal, the pain, it was the last thing tying me to you. By forgiving you, I'm finally cutting the cord. You are no longer my husband. You aren't even my enemy. You're just a man in a cage." Bruno slammed his hand against the glass. "I loved you. In my own way, I loved you." "You loved a version of me that was small enough to fit in your pocket," Clara countered. "The moment I grew, you tried to stunt me. You and your mother were so afraid of a peasant bloodline that you destroyed your own future. You didn't just sterilize me, Bruno. You sterilized the Brown legacy." She stood up, hanging the receiver back on its hook. Bruno was screaming something behind the glass, his face turning a panicked shade of red, but the sound was muffled, distant. He was a ghost, haunting a house that no longer existed. As she walked out of the prison, the sun was setting, painting the horizon in shades of bruised purple and gold. Back at Estrella Tower, a gala was in full swing, but it wasn't a party for the elite. Clara walked into the ballroom to find it filled with the staff of the Phoenix Foundation, community leaders, and the women she had spent the last 6 months helping. There were no gowns, no pretension, just the sound of laughter and the clinking of glasses filled with hope. Sebastian Vane was there, standing near the balcony. He had lost his shipping company to Clara in the takeover, but instead of being bitter, he had asked for a job. He was now her COO, and arguably her most loyal ally. "The numbers for the first quarter are in," Sebastian said, handing her a glass of sparkling water. "We've outperformed the Brown Group's best year by 20%, and we did it without a single bribe or offshore shell company. People work better when they aren't afraid of their shadows, Sebastian," Clara noted. He looked at her, truly seeing the woman behind the empire. "You know, the papers are calling you the Ice Queen. They say you're colder than Beatrice ever was." Clara looked out at the room, at a young woman who had just finished her first week of law school thanks to an Estrella scholarship, and at an elderly woman who finally had a safe home after years of fear. If being an ice queen means I'm the one who provides the foundation for others to build their lives on, then I'll take the title, Clara said. She walked to the center of the room and raised her glass. The room fell silent. 3 years ago, Clara began, her voice steady and echoing with a newfound strength. I was told that my value was defined by the name on my marriage certificate. I was told that my silence was my greatest asset. I was told that without the Brown family, I was nothing. She paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. But I learned that the loudest things in this world are built on the quietest foundations. We are the ones they didn't see coming. We are the ones who signed the papers, took the hits, and kept moving. Tonight, we don't celebrate a company. We celebrate the fact that no one, no husband, no boss, no mother-in-law gets to tell us who we are.
Stemde din.
The roar of applause that followed was louder than any gala the Browns had ever hosted. Late that night, after the guests had gone, Clara sat alone on the balcony of her penthouse. The city was a sea of light. She took a small velvet box out of her pocket. Inside was the very first necklace of resilience, a small, brilliant shard of the brown diamond cut into a sharp, beautiful drop. She put it on. The cold metal against her skin felt like a promise kept. She had lost a marriage, a name, and the chance to have a family of her own. But in the vacuum of that loss, she had built a world where she was finally, undeniably, free. Clara Evans closed her eyes and listened to the city. For the first time in her life, the silence wasn't a prison. It was a victory. And that, everyone, is the end of Clara's journey. She didn't just take the money and run. She took the very things that were used to hurt her and turned them into tools for good. From a quiet divorcee to the head of a billion-dollar empire, Clara proved that the best revenge isn't just winning. It's outgrowing the people who tried to keep you small. If you enjoyed this 7-part saga, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel bring more of these long-form stories to life. And let me know in the comments, what would you have done with that 40-carat diamond? Would you have kept it or followed Clara's lead? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. We've got a brand new one coming next week about a billionaire who went undercover as a broke college student to find out who was embezzling from his tech firm. You won't want to miss the twist ending on that one. Until next time, keep dreaming big and staying quiet until it's time to make some noise.